Hello everybody, this is KLAX, and today we will be flying the Embraer ERJ-190 from Kilo Sierra Alpha November to Kilo Lima Alpha X-Ray. So, within the Embraer 190, we will be flying the JetBlue livery, and this is an actual flight, and it starts at Gate 31, Terminal 2 in San Diego to Terminal 3 in Los Angeles. It should be a pretty nice flight. It's a warm summer morning, and this is an actual flight. It's accurate in all the possible ways I can make it, and this is usually a regularly conducted morning flight. Yeah, it is going to be complex, but it should be a good one. Okay, so here we are. It's the JetBlue aircraft that we will be flying today. Looks very nice, and we're situated on the yellow line, ready for pushback. So this is our aircraft, only blue, November 323 Juliet Bravo. We're just going to do a walking check around here. Of course this actually has nothing to do with how the plane flies, but this is what would normally be conducted. So yes, this is going to be a complex flight, but I'll show you guys a proper flight. Despite its length, it is very complex because we are using the Embraer. So we can get into the cockpit right now, and we are in a cold and dark state. Sorry, and let's put on the nav lights when we put on the battery. And after that, things would start up, and we could start on our flight plan, which will be from San Diego right over there. We'll follow this line down to Los Angeles right over there. So we can go more into detail and open up our flight planner, and then we can start plotting our waypoints. So specifically over here, these waypoints are as accurate as I could get them to be. There was no proper flight plan to look for. There was none really available, so I went to FlightAware and I got that all sorted out, and this is super accurate. It's not the exact thing, but it's close as possible. So anyways, you saw me there getting onto this line. We're departing off from runway 27, and we'll follow this line over here. We'll make a swinging right down to VP LMS and follow a nice curve down onto runway 24 left. During this flight, you'll see a lot of ILS being used. That's the instrument landing system, and I'll get into that later. Paired with the ILS, you'll see a lot more autopilot than my last video. That's because this is a more complicated plane. I'll be using the autopilot more because I can only do so much as one person. So I'm going to need some more assistance. Of course, it's not going to be a full-on autopilot. You never want to land with autopilot. You never want to take off with autopilot. But I'm going to try my best to keep this as accurate as possible. Nevertheless. So that is our entire route over there as a whole. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to center myself so we're good for departure. And there, I'm just scrolling down, is the flight plan, just in case you guys want to do the same flight. And by this time, all the avionics should be set up. So I'm going to put in my no smokings and seatbelt lights. People are going to start coming in. Well, they already should have been, but they'll be inside the cabin. People are going to start getting situated, and we're almost ready to go. But this is the cabin right now that I'm panning around, and it's very well modeled. It'd be nice to see some texturing in the future. Of course, this isn't their #1 priority with all the suggestions that's coming in, but it should be updated maybe in the future. It's good to update the smaller planes, especially for interregional flights. Anyways, at this time, we would be preparing for pushback. And in the cabin, what we would do is put in the beacon lights, turn them on, and we would call down the grounds crew. And that initiates or signals that we want to leave. So here we are, pushing back the aircraft. So to keep this accurate, you might think always be in the cockpit, but because we don't actually have full control and over the towing, I'm going to jump out of the cockpit, go into a third person, and actually take the role of the tower to make this accurate. And I'm going for realism here. This, of course, should be done in the third person all the time because you're pretty blind in the cockpit if you're going reverse. But yeah, all we're going to do now is we're going to swoop on left, connect with the taxi line, and we'll taxi on down to runway 27. So we're just going to make our left soon, and we'll be good to go. So, as I said before, this is an advanced flight. I would especially suggest this to advanced pilots. This flight basically captures all of the complex utilities that are seen in a 777, in a 747, and so on, yet in a small aircraft. And the benefit to that is within the region, within one region, you can conduct an entire flight. So the same thing can be done in the London region, in the Amsterdam region, but here we are in the Southern California region. I'm going to show you how to conduct a complex flight in a small plane. So we're going to put on our flaps, and we are waiting here for a while because the tower and the grounds crew need to get away. But after that, we're good to go. The generators and everything should be on for the engines, so we're good in that, and we're just going to go up to about 21 knots and continue our way down. Over here you'll actually see me, I'm gonna go tiny bit over 20. That's fine. I mean, technically the regulation's set at 35, but it's a good rule to keep your speed lower than 20 or around 20. In actual airports, that is the regulation speed, because they have so many intersections, and especially in international airports such as San Diego and Los Angeles, especially New York and Heathrow. You got to be cautioned on the intersections, and you got to know the traffic around you, and that can only really be accomplished at a lower speed. So we're going to maintain this here, and usually this is a good time to go over the briefing. So first of all, as you can see, we're going to connect onto that separate junction, and then we'll be able to depart, because this line actually takes us to the cargo ramps. So we're actually going to divert off that, and in the next intersection we'll connect on to the left taxi line. Second of all, once we actually get onto the when we get onto the runway, we have to know where we're going after that. So the first thing that you're going to hear me call out once we get on the runway is I'm going to make sure everything's checked, all lights and everything. After that, we're going to gradually accelerate, thus stabilizing the engines, and then we'll be good for thrust power, takeoff power. Once that is set, I'm going to call out 80 knots, and then after that we're going to wait till we get to our V1 speed, which in this case is 145 knots. And what that signals is the point of no return. That means that once we pass this speed, there's no point in aborting takeoff. You cannot do that, because it's going to create more damage than it would be if you took off and landed elsewhere. So that's what V1 means, and that's based on the runway length and your weight and so on. Next, I'll call out V-rotate, and what that means is you have to pitch up the aircraft. It's the suitable speed to pitch up and avoid tail striking, avoid breaking anything in the aircraft, and avoid overspeeding. And that speed is 155 knots. So I'll call that out, and then we'll rotate and go on. You won't hear me call out V2, that's our safety speed. Instead, I'll just say positive rate and gear up, and what that means is that our speed and our altitude are going upwards, and so that signals a good time to put your gears up, because you're good to go. You're flying. There's no slowing down, and there's no sense of drag yet. After that, we'll settle on 3,500 feet per minute ascent, and we'll continue up that way until we get to our first turn at Jetty. And from then on, it's just going to be our climb, and it should be pretty simple after that. But right now, we're just following the line, it's pretty simple taxi over here, nothing too complicated. I would like to do a nice, interregional flight on live. I do not have access to live right now, but I hope to get that in the future. So we're coming up to an intersection here. If you've been noticing, I've stopped at every intersection. It's a good habit to get into, especially if there's a stop line. Also, if you noticed, I put on my autopilot 15,000, flight level 150 on my altitude. And that is our cruising altitude. So once we have our autopilot enabled and stabilized, I will tap on the altitude button and we will have that situated. It's going to initiate an altitude lock where our plane will stay at cruising altitude. Usually pilots don't set up their cruising altitude on the altimeter knob, and the reason why that is because the ATC will usually communicate via transponder to the pilot, and they will tell them specific vectors that they should follow, which is a height, a speed, a direction. So we don't really need to worry about that. Other than that, it's a pretty easy departure. I wouldn't really say in total that this is an easy departure. It's definitely more advanced, and if you're looking for a challenge, I would highly suggest this. So we're coming up on our left turn here, and of course we're going to hold short. So we will do just that. And right now at this point when I'm flying the plane, I'm keeping an eye on everything. So I'm thinking in my head, okay, my takeoff flaps are ready. Autopilot off, I don't need it for takeoff right now, but my altitude's all ready and whatnot. Then I'll pan over or click over to my lights, you'll see that soon, and I'll make sure I'm good for my seatbelt, smoking, nav and beacon lights. And now I'll calibrate my aircraft, because so far I might have moved a little bit, which I did. So I'm going to recalibrate, and I'm going to make sure that I'm neutral in my yoke setting for takeoff and departure. So we're just going to continue this line now that we've had clearance, and we're going to roll into the runway at a nice gradual speed, nothing too fast. And we're just going to follow this turn until we get to the dotted lines. We'll center ourselves, and then we'll go for our departure. This is a nice time of day to fly. It's really nice sun dynamics, and everything looks great in the cockpit. There goes our landing and strobe lights, and we are good to go. At this time, I usually see a lot of pilots just stop, especially in the videos on YouTube. A lot of people just stop for like a few seconds and then go, but we're good to go, and you shouldn't really do that. So we have gradually increased our speed to our N1 spool, which is at 95%. You can see our N1 on the top left. It's going to be a takeoff and climb speed. There's 80 knots, and we don't really need to do anything, because once we get to about 250 knots, we'll cap that. And coming up, yep, there's V1 and V rotate. Let's get out of here. So nice and easy. Departure, positive rate, gears up, check, that is good. Soon I'll initiate the autopilot for my vertical speed. Contrary to my other video, vertical speed was set earlier. I'll talk about that soon, but we should go over our takeoff replay. So there we go, roaring down the runway. Very nice, backlit. It looks really really nice from this point of view, especially in the morning time. We passed our V1 and our V rotate, so there we are, doing just that. And very smooth takeoff, and our gear goes in as we have our positive rate. And looks like we are good to go, so we can go back in the cockpit now and resume our climb out. So we're just going to try to maintain this heading as best as possible manually, and so we'll come up to our turn. Autopilot's handling the vertical speed for us, so we don't have to worry about that. But as I was saying, my autopilot's coming on a lot earlier relative to my other video, and that's because I'm concentrating on so many other things. During this, I have to make sure that everything's stable. Soon I'll be putting up my flaps after we complete this turn, and the autopilot is necessary at this point. there is a need for autopilot, but there's no point in not using it. Of course, if you're taking off, you should manually do that. But once you get into the air, it's necessary to actually put in your autopilot, especially in a non-shared cockpit. So we just completed this turn, and I'm going to put my flaps up soon. Just want to make sure I'm aligned. And the reason why I put my flaps up during straightaways is because it would be more comfortable for the passengers. When you put on your flaps, and you'll feel this in an actual plane, you'll feel kind of like a weightlessness, and that's because the aircraft is converting all that vertical speed into horizontal, so you're getting kind of a weightlessness feeling. So that's what's happening here, and it's a lot less felt in straightaways. So we're extending our climb out now, going on to 5,000 feet per minute. I'm going to increase my throttle very soon to 270, and that's going to be our cruising speed. Also, once we get to around 10,000 feet, flight level 100, I will take out my strobes, or rather turn off my strobe light and my landing lights, and we'll continue on that way. Everything else seems pretty good though. My flaps are up, and you know, after we complete our second turn, I'll put my seatbelt lights off, and then we'll be good for a cruise. You can look around the cabin here. It's very nicely lit. I'd say that, you know, when you fly at this time, you really get the full range of dynamic lighting in the cockpit, which I really like, and I think it was very well done in Infinite Flight. But it would be cool to see in later versions where we have some shadows in the cockpit, you know, reflections, the middle divider on the windows there, that could be reflected down depending on where you are facing the sun, and I think a lot could be added here, but of course those are minor things, and you know, Infinite Flight should really deal with the granular things first. So there's the autopilot, making sure that we're level. I think it is a bit abrupt by the autopilot, and I'm surprised I did it so close to 15,000, but it's okay. At this point, we'll increase our throttle, and we will continue our turn. And we're almost out of the turn. We're going to stick close to the magenta line, following the right heading at 307, which I am adjusting right now. And then once we do that, we'll be okay for a cruise, and I'll time-lapse that part so you don't have to wait. And after that, we'll do our departure, and it should be a pretty nice, smooth flight. Just going to lock in my heading very soon, and there goes our landing and strobes. Accidentally I clicked the landing, but there goes our seatbelts as we lock in our heading very soon, and we'll be good then. So I'm just going to make sure I line up with that magenta line. It's good enough for me. Let's turn back at 307, lock it in, and yeah, there's our full cruising state in the magenta highlighted, and yeah, we should be pretty good. I think everything looks fine. We're locked in, so we can watch a little time lapse now. Okay, and we're back in the cockpit now, and I'm starting my arrival. So what I first have to do is sort out my my power and my vertical speed. Before I do that, I need to adjust the altitude so that it doesn't lock my vertical speed. Then after that, I'm going to take my horizontal speed and go and set it at 240 knots. It's good to make sure that your speed is below 250 when you're below flight level 100, and because that's a regulation. So what the throttle is going to do now is it's going to adjust itself, obviously go down to idle, and then it's going to make sure that it stays at the set throttle that I put it. At the same time, I made sure that my vertical speed was down a certain rate so that I would end up at 10,000 at the waypoint VP LMS. So during this whole descent, I'm not really going to talk about my exact numbers for my calculations or anything like that, but I will talk about how I arrived at those numbers. So what I'm doing here is I'm making certain waypoints on my descent, little checkpoints to set at specific altitudes, and then based on that run a few checks. And in essence, this is what actual pilots do, except it's obviously done through the autopilot and a flight manager. So what I'm doing is I'm making my waypoints at flight level 100, flight level 50, and flight level 30. And beyond 30, I'm going to be using less and less autopilot, and then I'll disengage it during my final, and then manually fly a short final down into Los Angeles. So I'm making my turn here at Minot, and we're basically getting off that traffic line and onto our actual descent and flight pattern. So now that we're getting off Minot, I'm going to make sure that that my altitude is in the right rate and in the right height. At the same time, I'm going to start to do my checks, and during this part of the flight, I think it's the most complex because you have to constantly look around, and you also, if you want to go for a gradual descent, you have to pay attention to your calculations and the time in between the waypoints. Then based on that, you can dictate a specific rate for your vertical speed, and then after that you can make sure that once you arrive at a waypoint, you're at a specific altitude. So at VP LMS, I'm tailoring my vertical speed so that I arrive there at about 10,000 feet. And to make sure that I don't undershoot it, I guess, I'm going to make sure that I have an altitude lock at flight level 100. So by the time I get there, and if I get there too early, which may be the case, the altitude lock will come in, and I will just stay level at flight level 100. So right over there you saw me. That's where LAX is, and as you can see, a bunch of different airports are popping up. These are both regional and some a tiny bit bigger, but they're not obviously used by bigger airliners. And so yeah, you can really see how a lot of smaller airports around this area, and it's a good thing to recognize because you can also practice here on small planes and do a bunch of different regional flights. Right there you saw me put down my landings and strobe lights. What I'm doing now is I'm preparing to meet regulations for when we pass flight level 100. So the first thing we have to do is make sure that we're under 250 knots. And that's the thing that they're really checking for in Infinite Flight Live. However, in solo and for realism, what I'm going to do is I'm also going to put down my strobes and landing lights, which you saw. And that's a general rule accepted throughout the entirety of aviation. And yeah, so you just need to make sure that those are down so that the airports and other aircraft, and really the ATC, can recognize you as an aircraft that is descending, either descending towards a landing or ascending towards a climb in a cruise. So as you can see, I set my new altitude lock at 5,000, flight level 50, and consequently I am adjusting my vertical speed to negative 1,000 feet per minute. So what I'm doing now is I'm setting up my next waypoint, which at that point I want to be at flight level 50 and probably around 180, 170 knots. As you can see, as I decrease my speed, my altitude, I'm making sure that I'm following my checks, and I'm making sure that everything's a lot more gradual than going down to a specific flight level and using like a step pattern. Of course, it's fine to do that, and actually most aircraft do that because they're directed by the ATC to maintain certain altitudes for a specific amount of time. However, it's a good idea to reduce the amount of time you're at a specific altitude speed if you want to maintain a gradual flight. Hopefully in the future, in infinite flight, it would be great to see the ATC tell pilots, what to do at specific points, maybe give them vectors. This would probably be automated because I don't think it would work well if you'd have to be pretty experienced to actually tell an aircraft what to do if you were playing the ATC position. So I think it would be nice if we could see an automatic ATC give specific vectors for aircraft pilots. So we're approaching John's, that waypoint, and at that time I want to be close to 5,000 feet, and as you can see, I'm adjusting my vertical speed. I'll go into a little bit detail while I'm doing that. So as you can see on the bottom center of my screen, you can see ETE, and that's the estimated time towards our next waypoint. That says 2 minutes and 20 seconds. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure that my vertical speed is about less than 1,000, because a little bit greater than negative 1,000, and so that way my rate and my speed will take care of my altitude. And it can be complex math, but if you're good at math, and if you do this a lot, you'll get into the hand of just doing quick math and creating gradual descents towards an airport, and really avoiding that point where you're nose diving down or you're too low and you need to go at a vertical speed of negative 100. So you want to make sure that you're on a glide slope, and to really do that, it's just a bunch of simple math. So there's the sunrise, I guess, and it's going across the cockpit. It looks really nice, and as you can see, as that's happening, the cockpit's getting a lot darker. I think it'd be nice in the future to see a lighted cockpit. Hopefully also in the future on my channel I'll upload a video on a bunch of feasible suggestions for the infinite flight developer cruise. Hopefully, this will help maybe, but I'll go over different ideas that I think can be implemented by keeping smaller region areas and trying to make it so that it could happen. But that's another video. Anyways, we're coming up at this pretty sharp turn, and I know it is going to be sharp, so I'm just starting it a tiny bit early, and I'll probably bank at about 30 degrees. You never really want to go more than that, it becomes uncomfortable. But anyways, here we are at a turn. I also put down flap 7. I'm going to start slowing my speed here at about 5,000 feet above, and you're really going to see me extend most of my flaps at around 3,000 or flight level 3.5, around there. There's the autopilot pitching up for me to maintain that altitude lock. I think sometimes the autopilot does it really well. On other occasions such as this, I don't think it was done correctly. I think the autopilot should do it a lot slower, or you should be able to program when the autopilot, or sorry, the rate of change when the autopilot arrives at a specific altitude. So we're going to put down a heading lock here, and I'm not going to go completely in line with the heading, but what I do want to do is I want to make sure that I'm getting closer and closer to that magenta line. It helps in general, and it's okay if you're a tiny bit off, but I just want to make sure that I'm keeping with the flight path. So as you can see, we're getting a lot closer to LAX now, and we're almost towards our final. We're just coming here in about almost the last stages of our descent and towards our final. So we're going to continue out here and then make a slight left turn, and we're going to keep on doing that for a little bit until we get down to the waypoint Sutai, which is right where the red triangles are. Also in this landing I'm going to be using ILS like many other aircraft would use in this situation. ILS is the instrument landing system, and it's responsible for giving an aircraft pilot a relative view of where they are positioned, both height-wise and where they're positioned either left or right of the runway. So it tells them, go down or go towards the left, and it really helps them align with the runway, is what I'm getting at here. So we're going to make our turn here and continue on that magenta line, and from here on out it should be pretty simple. As you can see, my vertical speed has increased from the prior ones because as you might have saw just then, our vertical speed's at about -300. Towards the end of the actual flight and towards the final, you want to think about almost decreasing your rate of vertical speed and making sure that you're slightly shallower than you were on your descent. Usually in the final you'll follow the glide path, but when you get there you want to maintain a comfortable descent and make sure that it's not too much or too little. Also, it's a good time to mention, if you realize that you're too high up, you can of course maintain that altitude, and then if allowed, especially on a live server, you could then disengage your altitude lock and perform a 360-degree turn to lower your altitude. So anyways, here we have aligned our heading so that we are exactly where we need to be for the next waypoint, and now we're almost pretty much directly on the magenta line. I'm increasing my vertical speed just a tiny bit so that I can make sure that I reach the next waypoint at about almost at flight level 30. And then what I'll do is I'll use the ILS. So we're continuing on here. In my mini-map on the bottom left, you can see all those red triangles. Those are individual ILS patterns, and they're pretty straightforward, and they lead straight into the runway. We are going to be arriving on runway 24 left, and you can see the first instance of picking up an ILS localizer, and that can be seen to the right of our heading indicator. Just to the right and a tiny bit down, you can see ILS 25, and then the airport to the left of us. we're going to look out for when we get to ILS 24 KLAX, Kilo Lima Alpha X-ray, and we're going to be looking for runway 24 left, that is 25 right, so that's going to readjust as we get towards our specific runway. And as you see here, we're going to have to intercept the rightmost runway. And that's actually common on this flight because that runway is usually used for departures, while 24 left is used in landings in the specific time and the specific flight. Of course, this will change a lot, especially if you're in live, so you can plan accordingly. But anyways, here we're getting aligned. We've picked up the ILS for 24 right, and the aircraft's gonna perform an altitude lock at flight level 30, which it is doing right now. Then after that, we're gonna begin our descent into our final. Just want to re-emphasize again, this is a very complex flight. Would recommend to advanced pilots and flyers. Definitely, if you want to achieve this with realism in mind, you have to have experience on here. So I just want to re-emphasize that. This could easily be performed with even like a Cessna 208 with different airports within this region. However, this flight is the best for a complex flight because it's interregional, so you're maintaining that full flight, and at the same time this flight has a complex aircraft, and it's the longest interregional flight that's actually conducted. So as you can see here, we have the ILS to the left of our altitude indicator and right below our heading indicator. And those two ILS functions tell us that, well, for the altitude that we're a bit too high, and that arrow is telling us that we need to go lower. So to the left of our altitude, you can see a line and two dots on the top and the bottom. That arrow needs to be in the middle, so it's telling us that we have to point our nose lower, or in this case, we can lower the throttle, and that'll make sure that we increase our rate of descent. On the other hand, below our heading, you can see two dots to the left, two dots to the right, and a big line in the middle. That line needs to be in the center, and it's respectively telling us that we need to go towards the left, and that'll align ourselves horizontally with the runway. So as you can see there, I just put down the gear and I armed the spoiler. This would be an alright time to arm the spoilers, but the gear should have been down a while ago. Looks like I forgot that. Sorry, but the gear should really be down at about flight level 15. There's a whole range of altitudes when the gear should be down, but definitely not below 1000. So we're coming up to our final parts of this final, and we're going to be worrying about our power, making sure that we're at a good speed. So 145 around there, 140 is good enough for us. And at the same time, we're going to be worrying about our flare. And we're basically just going to flare just at the last second, pick that nose up. As you can see us coming down here, we're just going to nicely pick it up and then just place it on the asphalt as we just did. What we're going to do here is align ourselves with the center line and simultaneously pull out the reversers. We're going to let go of the reversers at about 60 knots, and that's because when the reversers are too long, what's going to happen is it'll pick up a lot of dust particles and it'll increase the rate of erosion for the turbofans. When we let go of the reverse thrusts, we're going to put down the brakes, and that'll do the rest of the work for us. Obviously, you do not want to put your brakes down too early because that'll wear them out too much and it'll create too much heat. Risk of fire is definitely possible there. So now we're just going to watch a replay as we taxi off here. We're coming down and very smoothly just going to pick up the nose and then nicely placed the nose down with the rest of the aircraft. Overall, I thought this landing was alright. I have done better landings, and I'll possibly put down a landing video, but I'm definitely pleased with this, especially after a nice 20-minute flight. And as you can see, the spoilers went up nicely because they were armed, and gear set down beautifully. And as you can see, the spoilers will come off. Flaps will raise soon as we go off this runway. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to come to a nice stop. And the reason why we can do that is we pass that stop line. And this is totally normal. And at this time what we would do is we'd make sure our lights are proper and start cleaning up the aircraft in terms of flaps. You are allowed to do this in a particularly heavy day where there's a lot of traffic. It would be recommended that you continue your rollout to a separate point where the ATC has designated you to slow down, and then you can obviously make sure that everything's fine there. I particularly want to stop and sort out my lights because in fact in real life what the pilot would do is they would immediately want to turn off their landing and strobe lights because it can blind other aircraft pilots, not fully blind, but expose them to really bright lights, and it's also definitely not needed. On the other hand, what they would do is put on their taxi lights, which are a lot dimmer, and they focus more downwards instead of straight ahead. And I think that would be a nice thing to add for the future of an infinite flight. So we're going to follow this pathway down here onto Terminal 3, which is the actual JetBlue terminal, and then we'll turn there and park. And that should be the end of that, and we'll do a quick cleanup afterwards. As you can see, that's the runway we just landed at, 24 left. It was an alright landing, and we definitely used the ILS properly. That is a good example on how to use the ILS, and it's meant to really help the pilots and add less complication to the landing. Of course, you can do a visual landing, which would mean that you do not rely on the ILS, and focus specifically on the PAPI lights, which are the 4, or in this case 2 red and or white lights. The ILS is slightly more realistic because it designates a specific flight path and altitude profile for an aircraft specific to an airport. So as you can see, we just made our turn, and I think we'll take the first exit here and park at that gate. JetBlue has most of Terminal 3 occupied. I think there's another airline I forgot right now, but we are pretty safe parking right here. We're just going to make a nice little right turn and make sure we follow that curved line, that yellow line, into our parking spot. Looks like I overshot it just a tiny bit. We'll align ourselves and make sure we're straight on the line. So just going to make that left turn there. Of course, in real life, we would be able to, look and lean a little bit forward so we could see where we were going, and of course we'd have assistance by ground crew. Looked on the left there just to make sure that we were aligned, and there we are, perfectly aligned on the yellow line. I would say it's a really nice flight. This is LAX from a nice third-person point of view. Before we leave, we're just quickly going to clean up, so we can get rid of this flight plan and clean that up, put that away, center ourselves there, and then what we would do is we'd, of course, let the passengers out and turn off our beacon lights. And while passengers would board outside and out of the plane, we would continue cleaning everything up, turning on our APUs so we can of course take the engines out, and later, after the no smoking and all our avionics are turned off, well, before that we would turn off the navs and we'd be cleaned up. So thank you for flying with me from San Diego to LAX. It's been a great flight. I hope you enjoyed it. This has been KLAX, and have a great one. Thank you.